What is going on, guys? It is Dan here, and we are back with From the Depths. So today's episode was kind of a suggestion of one of the viewers of the last video. Basically, instead of getting right back into the action, we're going to take an episode, just kind of relax, kind of go over what I do whenever I build my ships, and also I'm going to show you guys the flagship design that I have. It's mostly done. In fact, I made a couple changes to it today as I was adding on the shields, but we're going to start with the flagship, and then we're gonna go from there. Now, I am going to apologize in advance. We'll get to that in a second. So this is the CSS Mars. So obviously I had to name it after the Roman god of war, because, well, I mean, it's meant to be like our actual like war flagship kind of thing. This is going to be spearheading all of our attacks. So it's an interesting design, and I will kind of explain why I built it like this, and I will go into more detail as I'm building a ship to show you guys exactly what I do and what my thought process is while I'm building these things. So for starters, if you've been around for a while, you probably recognize a couple of these turret systems. So these two turrets on the center part of the hull are obscenity turrets, I think. That's what they were. Basically 2,000 millimeter armor piercing shells. Basically these things were designed to punch through heavy armor, and these variants are a little bit different. They don't have as much heavy armor in the turrets because, one, heavy armor tends to be, well, heavy, and it sinks it, and two, it slows down the turret rotation. So less heavy armor, just regular metal seems to be doing just fine. And I think the barrels are slightly shorter, but other than that, the turrets are relatively the same. Next, we have two obelisk turrets on either side on these little extra hull parts. I don't know what to call them. I mean, they're disconnected from the main hull and are attached by these little connector beam things, but we'll just call this the right hull, or the left hull. I mean, I guess left, right, sure, why not? So this is the left hull. Essentially, we have two obelisk turrets meant to provide a lot more in the way of DPS. So they're firing good old armor piercing, sort of like on the Poseidon. And then here in the back, which was an addition I made today, we have two Omen turrets, which have also been de-armored. So now they're not really using as much heavy armor. But, I mean, they're basically the same turret. So very good durability, pretty great armor. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And then up here in the front, we have two front-facing high explosive cannons. So more 2,000 millimeter, big, derpy, high explosive guns. These only face forward and they have a 45-degree firing arc. Yeah. These are meant to destroy anything that's just in the front of the ship. So at any given point, we probably have about 3 turrets, maybe 4, firing on a single target. But in an optimum position, we could have all of the guns firing. So if we were kind of lined up like this, all of the guns can fire on a target, which basically the target doesn't last very long. So it's a pretty powerful ship. So the reason why I kind of went with this kind of weird design was, one, this is the same hull that I use on the Poseidon, except it's been up armored and it's a little bit deeper to give it some extra buoyancy, because that was one thing I was running into. The problem with is that this thing is incredibly heavy. Like, we're talking, where is it? Yeah, that's a pretty large amount of mass there. I still don't know what unit this game works in, so we're just gonna leave it at that. But I didn't want to build a whole new hull, because one thing you're going to notice whenever I start building a hull, to show you guys what I do, it takes a while, and the bigger the hull is, the more time it's going to take. So I figured, well, the Poseidon hull is very flexible. It can do a lot of things. It's reasonably large. It's got I guess, just good dynamics to it. So I decided I was going to bolt on 2 more narrow side hulls that would provide extra buoyancy and stability on top of being able to place more guns on them. So this is kind of the idea of this ship, I guess. These 2,000 millimeter guns actually have all of their little gun components running underneath inside. It's probably really difficult to see because this is such a narrow space. Yeah, so we have pretty much everything running along here, all the way down the back end of the ship, and then we have another little gap down here for more buoyancy because, again, this is an incredibly heavy ship. And I didn't really bother painting everything that's going to be below the water because, well, that would take forever to paint. I'll probably get around to it at some point, but for right now it's something I'm avoiding doing. So this costs us about 116,000 resource, so it's pretty expensive, but I definitely can't wait to bring this into the campaign, and then we will definitely be able to do it when we get back into it next episode. So that's kind of the design choices I went with this flagship and how I think it's going to do pretty well. I mean, in testing it's done well pretty much against everything, including flyers. So we're just going to see how it goes. Now, the part you guys are probably more interested in is me actually building something. So let's go ahead and do this. And let's go ahead and design our ship. So I guess really the first thing I do is I set up the the floor of the ship. So I am going to apologize in advance. I am not very good at providing commentary when I'm doing stuff like this, so there's a good reason why this hasn't really happened a whole lot in the history of the channel. So I think really the first thing I do is I make sure I've got a pretty solid rectangle. I guess that's the best way to describe it. Not too narrow, because the issue is that the more narrow it is and the taller we make the ship, it has a greater chance of tipping over. So that's kind of the first thing I really do. The next thing I do is I start designing the shape of the hull. So typically speaking, since this is going to be the rear of the ship, it's a lot flatter and doesn't have as much in the way of rounding, because, well, we don't really need to go backwards that fast. And then in the front, the way I've been designing my ships this campaign is they aren't as rounded at the front that I typically do, mostly because, I don't know, I kind of wanted to try something different. So what I typically do is I'll do 2 of each type of beam, but considering we can pretty much just get away with that, since, you know, 2 + 2 is 4, quick maths, you know. Oh, that was not a good joke. And then this kind of gives us the actual front of the shape. Okay. And then after that, I just kind of start filling in the gaps. So this will give us the basic outline of our ship, and at this point, it's just kind of building vertically. So I typically like to, actually no, that's not what I wanted to do. The way I design these ships is, it's such a weird way to describe this, because, I mean, I don't know, I don't typically do, like, tutorials and stuff on this kind of thing, because, well, I'm not very good at describing how I'm doing my stuff, especially when I'm trying to do it. But I figure, you know, I might as well try it just this once, see how it goes. And I guess that works too. I was more interested in going down, but yeah, that's actually pretty darn close to what we want. Now, part of my design is I have to make sure that the height of the wall is at least 4 meters, One of the things I do in this campaign is I make sure that the hull, especially on the sides, is up armored. And one of these neat little things that I start to do now is, if I can actually get this thing to rotate, there we go. So we have them going this direction, but now if we start placing them down vertically, since we now have an alternating pattern in the walls of the ship, if something was able to punch through both pieces of armor, instead of having a giant 4-meter wide hole, we now only have a 1-meter hole. So it's actually a little cheat that I kind of came up with as I was building these initial ships. I realized that, you know, if we did that, it would minimize the amount of hull damage we would take substantially. I mean, we would still have, you know, holes in the hull, but it would definitely solve quite a few problems. And then we're just kind of building out the rest of it at this point. So if I go ahead and grab this real quick. Now, also keep in mind that this is an incredibly fast build, so I'm probably making quite a few mistakes that I'm going to find out that I did make here in a moment, so... oh, yep, there was one. We got to start going up now. So I guess my design philosophy for these ships is durable, but maybe not necessarily all that fast, which might have to change when we go up against our next set of enemies, because, well, we're going up against the Onyx Watch. I think I've never like really figured out how to pronounce that. I don't know. It's weird. And we're messing it up again. So they are typically focused more on having very, very slow-moving ships and very slow-moving projectiles. So if we were to actually go ahead and go up against them, it's probably in our best interest to have faster ships, because then that would minimize the amount of damage we would take. Alright, so now what we're going to be doing is sort of sealing off both ends of the ship. I'm trying my best, guys. I'm trying my best to keep talking while I'm doing this. Alright, so that's pretty much more or less the outside of the hull. One thing I do though is to avoid up-armoring the entire ship too much. In fact, actually I'm going to switch over to wood for this. Basically, to do compartments on the inside of the ship, I like to, well, keep the center hull as its own separate place, which in turn will allow us to, well, prevent damage. And if we use wood, sure, it's easier to break, but it's kind of really only going to be used to divide the compartments. And considering it's one of the lightest materials, in fact, I don't remember if it is the lightest. Wait. Oh, it's actually light alloy. But then again, light alloy words is a little bit more expensive, so I think I'm going to stick to what I'm using right now with just wood. So what I'm doing right now is setting up the sort of internals of the ship, and then after that we're going to go back to why is it doing that? No, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. That's not pretty. Okay. We're gonna do it this way. There we go. I basically just, I don't even know what I'm doing at this point. It's... yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're kind of compartmental... we're splitting the ship and... we're splitting the ship up into compartments. My gosh, this is a disaster already. So these 3 separate compartments are really going to be used for, well, the rear compartment is for engine. Center compartment is for basically all of the electronics and ammunition and stuff like that. So everything we're going to put in there is going to be for controlling the ship. And then up here in the front is kind of just resource space, I guess. I mean, I really don't use the front of the ship all that much because it would be a dumb idea to put things up here, considering this is where we're probably going to take the most hits at. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start defining the front of the ship, because one thing you're going to notice about my ship designs is that they're not all completely blocks. I do actually try to round some corners out. Okay, so I think that's pretty close to what we would want. So we're going to go ahead and start grabbing some diagonal beams, because this is going to help shape the ship out a little bit and reduce drag. So it's actually kind of really useful, especially given the design choices that I've made thus far. And I'm actually thinking, yeah, we're gonna bring it down a little bit more. One thing I've noticed about my color choice here is that it's actually really difficult to tell when I'm placing things, but I don't know, I kind of like the new color scheme. It's vibrant, I guess, is the best word to describe it with. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about the new color scheme, though, because I mean, it is kind of important. I'm actually going to turn down the intensity here, so that way we can see a little bit more of what we're doing. There we go. Alright, so right now we are just attempting to round out some of these corners up here in the front. Yeah, that's actually looking not that bad, because this is the part that I mess up all the time when I'm designing my ships. Yeah, that's actually not half bad for doing this pretty much on a whim. Alright, so one of the most important things to note, though, whenever you're doing this is always make sure you have the mirroring thing set up, because there's nothing worse than doing one side of the ship and then realizing you actually forgot to do the other part too. So definitely something to look out for when you're doing this. And we're actually almost done with the hull. Yeah, that's not that bad. But I am realizing I made a bit of a mistake here. We made these too tall. So we're going to go ahead and shorten those down a little bit so we can actually put the deck of the ship on. And I don't know if this is going to work, but might as well try. So we're going to now just fill in the top of the ship, and we'll have our hull more or less done. And then we can start putting some stuff in it. We're doing on time. I really do need to get something set up. Okay, we're doing fine. This looks amazing. So I guess this is the part we're gonna have to do by hand. And we are actually about to get to one of my more favorite parts of the ship design, and that is making the the outside of the hull look nice. So I typically grab the angled bits, like what I'm doing right now, and yeah, we want 2. And we're gonna start doing sort of, I don't know how to describe it. Basically, we're just gonna make the hull look pretty. Like, that's pretty much the easiest way to describe it. Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to get some rounded edges on the upper part of the hull. Like so. Alright, so the hull is pretty much done. So what do I want to do now? I think we're going to talk more about how I do my my turrets. So on a design like this, we might actually be able to fit 3 turrets, but I don't know. We're gonna figure that one out. So I typically like to put one in the rear. So let's see how much space we got. Yeah, that's good. And then we would put one in the front compartment. So that would be around here. Yeah. Okay, so there's that. And one of the things that I do on the insides of my ships is that since all of them are pretty much the same height, more or less, this one might be slightly shorter, is I run a beam straight through the center of them. And this should be about the right height. And this will allow us to more or less attach our, no, we want 3. More or less attach our turrets to something on the inside of the hull. It's a little bit more protected. So is that attached the whole way? No, we want 3. Alright. So if we go ahead and pop into my objects selector thing, I could go over turret design at some point in the future, but it's a topic that I don't typically do a whole lot of, and we are actually slightly short. Okay. Because I don't know if you guys can tell right now, but I am actually legitimately struggling to think of things to talk about, because I'm very much the kind of person that if I am working on something, I can't really talk, because, okay, it needs to be actually one more. One more. Okay, so this is actually kind of a short and stubby little ship, but I can't talk about anything while I'm working because it throws me off really bad. And I actually just realized my mistake. Part of the turret actually resides outside of the lower hull area, so your boy basically just did all of that for nothing, because that's how I roll, I guess. So I think our ship actually is the proper height, but I'm gonna leave that for right now just in case I have to make it lower again. Yeah, that was correct. I was just being really dumb. Yeah, so this actually is our typical ship height. So we're going to put this right around there. So I'm just going ahead and using the obelisk turret design because it's a very well designed turret. It's very flexible, it does its job well. So we got one here. Oh yeah, wow, we can actually probably fit even like 4 turrets on here. It's actually not a bad ship so far. That might actually be a little too far over. I don't know. that's actually not that bad. Okay. So now that we've got our turrets down, the next thing to do would be to build sort of the little caps that go over the tops of the halls. So with like the Poseidon design, what I would do is those should rotate the whole way around. I would assume at least. But just to be safe, we're going to give it a little bit extra room. And I like to connect these to the outside of the hall because it just makes it look nicer. And then this is the part where we kind of create the little envelope that wraps around it. Now again, a lot of this design comes down to what you would personally prefer to do. I mean, I would assume that my design choices are adaptable, so you guys can pretty much make any kind of change you would want to this design, but this is kind of how I've been doing it recently. And I don't think we're going to do this to the other turret, just because, again, I'm just kind of going over how I do this. And I messed that up too. Okay. Yeah, the next thing would be to do the slopes, because one thing I have learned a lot in the couple years that I've been playing this game is the more slopes you got, the better. However, having a large flat surface on the sides of a ship is actually not that bad, especially if you have the ship set up to go at a specific angle when it's approaching enemies, because one of the most important things is to, well, bounce as many shells as you possibly can, and the more that you can do that, the better. So having angles on your ship is actually a very good design choice. One that I've now completely messed up, actually, because we wanted 3, not 2. So you guys can tell I'm actually having a very difficult time right now. But, I don't know, it's gotten some laughs out of me. It's alright, I guess. Alright, so now we are going to kind of merge these parts together. If I remember how I did this, it was, that. Nope, we went single. No, we want it to rotate. There we go. And I don't remember how I think it might have been on the corner, one of these flat ones. Yeah, that actually looks about right. Yeah, what we want to do is switch that out actually to that. There we go. So now we've got the rear of the ship kind of worked out. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to pop in and put down our engine. I like to stick to things that are a little bit more fuel efficient, but given how massive these engines typically are, they're typically not all that fuel efficient to begin with, so we'll leave a little gap there and go ahead and grab our crankshaft. So I typically will do one very large engine and then add more smaller engines as I go along to basically increase the amount of horsepower that the engine can provide. So we're going to go ahead and use some carburetors in place of injectors, because although injectors do help, they kind of use up a lot of fuel, and it's not exactly what I like to do. I mean, then again, my ships aren't incredibly fuel efficient to begin with. I don't build these things to be that good. Alright, and then I guess really the last thing we do is kind of hook this thing up to its exhaust. So, go ahead and grab our exhaust thing there. And corner pipe. So this is going to go ahead and go all the way back. Yeah, actually we could try something new that I've never done before. That. So that way we get this one extra cool. Okay. Yeah, I think we could actually try this corner pipe. Like so. And then straight. And where is it? It's a weird one. I think this is, no, actually we could probably just, yeah, I did this a little weird. Forward pipe? Oh yeah, that's what we want. We want this to kind of split off. And next thing we want is a corner pipe, so we can kind of bring this a little bit up more towards sea level. Yeah, and then we are going to make it so that way it exits the ship. Cut those parts out. Hull pipe. Yeah, there we go. We got our exhaust system set up. Cool. So let's actually throw down some fuel to see how powerful this engine is. I'm imagining this is going to be a pretty powerful one because I don't think I've ever built an engine this big on any of my vehicle's resources. Fuel. So yeah, this is actually a pretty large engine in comparison to what I usually... Yeah, 6,400s. It's about the same on the original version of the Mars. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put down some air pumps, so that way these actual parts of the, these actual compartments are useful for stuff. Cool. And okay, so I guess the next thing we could do is where I typically do the ammunition and stuff. So I mean, at this point, really the only thing that's left to do is purely just anything you would do in a typical ship. If you guys wanted me to go into extreme detail, I could, but I'm probably going to call this here soon because I actually I have a friend in the emergency room right now, so I'm trying to, you know, do this real quick and go over and see how he's doing. So, oh, that actually is something we forgot to do: repair tentacles. One of the really cool things about having this bar is I just line it with repair tentacles, because one of the new things about the new ships I'm working on is I basically fill these things up with repair tentacles, so that way they repair things really quickly. And then we're gonna cut out to there, control. You gotta have your chair. One thing about my vehicle designs is there is never, almost never, a way to get from the underhull to the upper hull unless a turret's been knocked out. So my ships aren't designed to be used in that capacity, but you know, you never know when you're actually going to have to do something like that. So we're gonna actually take out a couple of these too, because this is where I put the ammunition at. So resources, ammunition storage. There's no difference between the barrels and the boxes. I just prefer the boxes because they look a little bit more modern. And I think about 2000s. 2000's pretty good. So this is really the only part of the ship that I will go out of my way to use heavy armor, because there is almost nothing worse than having your ammunition destroyed. in the middle of combat and then your entire ship just gets knocked out. It's not fun. Also, since this stuff is pretty expensive, I tried to limit the amount that I use to basically just cover what's there. And then on the outside, I will just strap on some ammunition processors to basically just do all the ammunition processing and get our ammunition put together, I guess. I don't really know how to word that. So that's typically about how many processors I would use. You also don't really need that much in the way of ammunition. The Mars might need a bit of an upgrade in that regard because it does use quite a bit of ammunition, considering there's like 8 guns on it. And I'm thinking about probably adding missiles to it later on as well. So it's definitely something to think about. Okay, so AI. I'm just going to put the AI down. I'm not really going to go into how I typically set things up, mostly because I don't know how I set things up a lot of the time. I will more often than not put down 2 or 3 AIs, depending on the number of weapons on the ship itself. But I will always have the first AI be the one that is the, I guess, the important one that does all of our sailing, I guess. And then I pretty much cover every extra space I can with these. Because, well, let's face it, we need these to do detection and stuff. So that's kind of how I do the AI, and then I guess we'll do resources, because, you know, you gotta know where I put the resources, I guess. And I'll typically just run the resources along the sides. Typically do a lot of them, because, well, it's good to have a large capacity for resource storage. And I just realized I only put them on one side. Oh well, it's a basic design error, I guess. And next thing is kind of just the controls. That's really it. So we want our propellers. No, okay, there's a slight design difference. We are going to put mirroring back on because I don't want to have to put these things down more often than I have to. And then in the little spaces in between, I'm going to just kind of tuck some extra ones in, because all the extra propulsion we can get is amazing. So next we want our rudder, so this will help direct the ship. And I will typically put some propellers on either side closer to the front of the ship, which will aid in steering. So right there. That's a pretty good spot, I guess. And I guess the big thing is it going to float? It should, because this is following my design principles. And it's floating pretty darn well. The back is a lot heavier because it has the engine in it, and the front isn't as weighted down because it also doesn't have the turret housing that I built. But if we go ahead and just hop into the ship itself, that is actually really fast compared to the rest of my ships that I typically built. So, you know, I might actually use this hull for something in the future. So I think that's pretty much how I go about building my ships, I guess. This is a pretty long video, so I'm going to have to call it here. If you guys want me to go into more detail in the future, I would be more than willing to do it. Just understand that it puts me in a very odd position to do it, so, you know. Anyway, that being said, thank you guys for watching, and thank you for continuing to support the channel, and in the next episode we will get right back into the action. So, I'll catch you guys next time.